And I must admit, of course, our next speaker, Jonathan Spear, is not here because Victoria State Government is our sponsor. He's not here because he's got shares in Jet Charge. He's not here to promote EV, the charging network, or even to be the poster boy for solar inverters and e-mobility solutions from FEMA, nor is he doing the green road loans from Transport Mutual. He's here because he's going to highlight the Infrastructure Victoria world-leading advice and recommendations to the Victorian Government on the infrastructure required to enable highly automated and zero-emission vehicles in Victoria, completed in October 2018. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jonathan Spear, the Deputy Chief Executive and COO from Infrastructure Victoria.
So thanks very much. What I'd like to do is talk about really an extension of what, actually in fact, of what Michael has been describing to us, because Infrastructure Victoria has done some specific work that really does extend and build upon some of what Michael was covering. So we've done some advice on automated and zero emission vehicles infrastructure, and that is something I think that I'd like to, of course, focus on the EV elements of this work, but also how it connects to automated vehicles in the future. So just quickly, Infrastructure Victoria is Victoria's independent infrastructure advisor, and we do three main things. We deliver a 30-year infrastructure strategy across all sectors of infrastructure. And we published that first in 2016, and excitingly, in early December, we're going to be releasing an update to that strategy, which will be out for consultation. We'll have many elements of it that I think you will all be really interested in. So I'd really encourage you to check that out when it is released in a few weeks' time. We also provide independent advice to government under particular terms of reference to look at tricky infrastructure problems. And this is the basis on which we did this work on automated and zero emission vehicles. And the third key plank of what we do is research around infrastructure investment and policy change. And some of that has included elements of transport network pricing and road user charges, which is also something that would be of interest, I think, to this audience. So we were asked to provide advice to the Victorian Government on what infrastructure might be required to enable operation of highly automated vehicles. And so for those of you who speak the automated vehicles lingo, that is the level 4, level 5 of automation. And so it's an assumption that we have got to that point in the future, and if we have level 4 and 5 in the fleet as a really dominant part of the fleet, what does that mean for the infrastructure in Victoria and other effects for our society? The government also asked us to think about the different ownership and market models that might emerge from highly automated vehicles, and really importantly, if we have a high proportion of zero emission vehicles in the fleet, what does that mean? And so by zero emission vehicles, of course, we have been looking at both battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, and thinking about the close connections in between automated vehicles and electric vehicles. So there's a great degree of interest, one might even say some hype, around automated vehicles in particular. And of course, electric vehicles are here, they're now. Michael was already talking about some of the applications there. There is a much greater degree of uncertainty about how automated vehicles are going to roll out and in what form of ownership and speed. So to deal with these levels of uncertainty, we approached through a scenario-based planning exercise. And we played around with different technology mixes and speeds. So the first of our scenarios we looked at was an all-electric scenario. So it's 2046. We're still driving the vehicles with a human driver, but our power source for the whole fleet is battery electric vehicles. So we had a close look at that. Then what we did is we took the driver away and inserted automation. So we still own our own vehicles, they're battery electric, but they're level 4 or 5 automation. And we looked at the effects that that has. Then we played around with the ownership model and said, well, what if instead of us owning our own automated electric vehicles, we used a shared fleet that we were able to sort of summon on demand? What would that do for the infrastructure and for the demand? Then we pulled out the battery from the vehicle and put a hydrogen fuel cell instead in, and looked at what effects that might be for an automated vehicle that was hydrogen fueled. And of course, that has some pretty significant effects for the energy system, unsurprisingly. Now, there is some degree of uncertainty about the speed at which we're going to adopt automated and electric vehicles. And so we had two scenarios, a slow lane and a high speed scenario. So slow lane is where, half of the fleet is our conventional petrol or diesel vehicles that we drive and own. And the other half is automated battery electric on-demand vehicles, which could certainly be pretty attractive, especially in dense cities where there is a strong demand and market for that. And so we looked at that sort of adaptation of a mixed fleet. The opposite end of the spectrum, we looked at, well, what if the offer of shared on-demand electric vehicles that are automated is just so compelling that we get rid of all of our internal combustion cars that we all own now and convert quite rapidly, in about 10 years to that model. So we had to look at that scenario of a really accelerated uptake of automated shared electric vehicles. And finally, at Infrastructure Victoria, we're open to all possibilities, including that for one reason or another, a future of automated electric vehicles doesn't occur. And so we did model what the network would look like, both traffic and energy networks in the future, if this didn't occur. And that really gives us a base case to compare against. And while it seems unlikely that we're going to have no electric vehicles in the future, and I would think it's unlikely that we wouldn't have increasing levels of automation, we do like to compare that alternative. So we then, looking at those scenarios, generated a very detailed evidence base that looked at what does it do to the traffic network? We did some detailed transport modelling. What does it do for the energy network? What does it do for the economy? We commissioned a study on the environmental and health effects, both carbon emissions, but also effects on people. We looked at the different design of roads, design of streets. What you can see here is Sturt Street in Ballarat, and we envisaged different locations across Victoria with either full or partial automation and how it might change our streetscapes. And we looked at some of the financial, economic effects that would happen, and also some of the IT requirements. And if you're interested in this, on the Infrastructure Victoria website, you can find a very cute video that describes those scenarios that I've explained to you, but also every one of the technical reports that we generated is available. I really encourage you to make use of that if you're interested. So we found some really big benefits that you can get from a fleet of vehicles that are electric or of hydrogen fuel cell and automated in the future. So some really significant economic benefits, about 2% GSP if we had a whole fleet of automated electric vehicles in 2046. Also, up to 91% of congestion reduction. Now, this is probably a very high-end optimistic estimate, but that is if the entire fleet was operating as a shared electric fleet and operating at its best possible operation of reduction of congestion. Similarly, we've found some really significant greenhouse gas emission reductions, so around 25% reduction in a Victorian context, but also some really big health benefits. And a lot of those health benefits that we quantified are reduction of the particulate matter that, of course, comes from internal combustion engines and heads into our lungs and does us long-term damage, not to mention the accidents that could be reduced. through automated vehicles, because up to 94% of accidents on the road are due to driver error. So again, it's probably a top end estimate of the benefits, but there's some big benefits from automation. So this is obviously a mix of electrification and automation benefits, but you can see the pathway that we're heading in, that there's some really big prizes out there that if we can get some of these early, it's really well worthwhile. Now, it doesn't all come for free. Some of the big investments of infrastructure that we identified were up to about $1.7 billion in mobile network upgrades. Now, this is primarily about enabling automated vehicles to be able to perform to their best, especially in regional areas where they don't currently have plans for high connectivity. And also improved road markings, again, for automated vehicles to be able to operate well. On the electrification side, if you had a fully electric fleet of battery electric, we estimated at least $2.2 billion worth of energy network upgrades would be needed. And I think this is relevant back to what Michael was saying before about the need for significant investment in energy network, but also our assumption, very importantly, was that would be coming from zero emission sources. And there's some really big choices to be made around whether the amount of energy upgrades that we need depends upon whether we are loading additional demand onto the energy network in the peak period, which is what you can see on the left-hand side graph here, where we estimated demand that would be needed there, versus if we're able to incentivize people through price incentives, but also smart charging technology, so that people are charging their vehicles outside of the peak load period. And so if we don't do this, you can add a couple of $1 billion more on the cost of the infrastructure upgrades that we will need to achieve an electric vehicle future. So there are a few themes that come out of this broadly. One, perhaps unsurprisingly to this audience, is that we're getting a very strong convergence between the transport and the energy sectors. Now, of course, there's already a convergence with fossil fuels, but when I say energy sectors, it's the electricity and possibly hydrogen as well. We're also getting this convergence between transport and ICT as vehicles become increasingly connected, and also looking at the role that automated vehicles in particular can serve as a complement to public transport and filling in some of those gaps, especially with on-demand services. We made some recommendations to the Victorian Government about actions that they can be taking to increase the uptake of automated and electric vehicles. I'll focus on the electric vehicles side, but you can see them all in our final report, which is available online. We were concerned that the regulatory frameworks that govern when energy network investments are made, which tends to be in blocks of years, may not be flexible enough to facilitate investment in the transmission and distribution networks in the particular times and places that are required to support uptake of zero emission vehicles. We, as I described earlier, allowing for incentives and controlled charging services to shift energy demand from peak periods to off-peak periods is also really important. And having consistent design standards and principles about where and when people can charge through which providers was important. On the planning side of things, there is a degree of uncertainty around the statutory planning requirements for car parking infrastructure where people want to retrofit, about whether and where there should be curbside charging and in public and private land. This is a real transition challenge that people have as they seek to take on electric vehicles, but also one for local governments to grapple with, where and in what locations and times they want people to be charging. So for more information on our advice, you can find it on the Infrastructure Victoria website. And as I said, there's also all of these detailed technical reports and videos that explain it. So really welcome any feedback you've got on that, and encourage you to build off that in your work. And there's the details of the Infrastructure Victoria website. And also, as I said earlier, really encourage you to be involved in the update to the 30-year infrastructure strategy. As part of that, excitingly, what we are doing is convening several hundred everyday Victorians who we're going to be deliberating with them over a couple of weeks in January and February about what it will take for them to help transition from petrol and diesel vehicles to meet Victoria's emission targets. And so that's really exciting for us. And if you or any of you, anyone in your network would like to be involved, we're still open at the moment for people who wish to take part in that deliberative engagement. So thank you all, and really look forward to further discussing this with you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Dr. Spear. We are looking forward to seeing you in the Q&A.